There was so much in you that charmed me that I felt I must tell you something about yourself. I thought how tragic it would be if you were wasted. Pause. All right, so Lord Henry throws his ideals out here for Dorian to latch on to. His youth's only going to last a little while. He can do anything when he's young. He's going to get old and lose all of that opportunity that comes with youth. And this is absolutely true. I think we can see that, in our own lives. Like I'm 42. I look good now to my 60-something-year-old self years later. But we're never happy with ourselves in the moment because we look back on an earlier version of ourselves and like, oh my God, I was better. Like seniors, you guys are almost at the peak of your physical perfection. You're a Dorian Gray. Like you got 5 more years and then things start maybe to go the other direction. Lord Henry's saying, do what you can now. Travel the world now while you're healthy. Visit things, do things, because every day options, they shut down and they're gone. Like, right now the beauty of youth, sorry, I'm on a tangent. You're going to have to deal with the tangent. The beauty of youth is that you have innumerable options in front of you. Right? Right now, you're trying to decide where you want to go to college. You could go anywhere, but as soon as you choose one, all those options close and you're on one track. And then you got to decide what you're going to major in. You could major in anything, but as soon as you choose one, you've chosen that major and you're on that track. Get married, you're on that track. Have kids, you're on that track. Get a career. And so your life is a series of choices that limit your choices. And as you get older, your choice range gets smaller. And so in your youth, when you're at the peak of your physical perfection, that's the time to live, to really live, to enjoy yourself. And yet we waste it often waiting for some better time that's going to come around. And when is it really going to be better? I mean, this is what Lord Henry's saying. There's some truth behind it. Villains, real good villains in literature, they tell you the truth. They just tell you the truth in a way that's going to damage you, and make you careless and things like that. But if there's not an element of truth, if there's not something that moves you in what they say, you don't care about them and they just seem like melodramatic idiots. And Lord Henry definitely is not. So anyway, he throws out this idea that the goal of Dorian Gray's life should be a new hedonism. Hedonism, you should look it up, is this idea that you should live life based on what's pleasurable, enjoyable to your sensations. You have 5 senses, you should pleasure those senses. And so he suggests that the century needs a new hedonism and that Dorian could be its what did he say? Visible symbol. Anyway, we'll keep going. I thought how tragic it would be if you were wasted, for there is such little time that your youth will last, such a little time. The common hill flowers wither, but they blossom again. The laburnum will be as yellow next June as it is now, and in a month there will be purple stars on the clematis, and year after year the green night of its leaves will hold its purple stars. But we never get back our youth. The pulse of joy that beats in us at 20 becomes sluggish. Our limbs fail, our senses rot, we degenerate into hideous puppets, haunted by the memory of the passions of which we were too much afraid, and the exquisite temptations that we had not the courage to yield to. Youth! Youth! There is absolutely nothing in the world but youth. Dorian Gray listened, open-eyed and wondering. The spray of lilac fell from his hand upon the gravel. A furry bee came and buzzed round it for a moment. Then it began to scramble all over the oval stellated globe of the tiny blossoms. I mean, this is a pollination image. Is that what just happened to Dorian's mind? You tell me. He watched it with that strange interest in trivial things that we try to develop when things of high import make us afraid, or when we are stirred by some new emotion for which we cannot find expression, or when some thought that terrifies us lays sudden siege to the brain and calls on us to yield. I think this is a great observation on humanity. Dorian Gray's focusing on this bee pollinating a flower because he doesn't want to think about what Lord Henry has said to him. What was the simile here? When things of high import make us afraid. You ever been in the principal's office and you're in trouble and you're waiting for the principal to come in? What do? You stare at all of the things on the wall and you look at all the desks and you see all the imperfection and you're hyper focusing on details to avoid dealing with reality. And that's what Dorian's doing here. After a time, the bee flew away. He saw it creeping into the stained trumpet of a Tyrian convolvulus. The flower seemed to quiver and then swayed gently to and fro. Suddenly the painter appeared at the door of the studio and made staccato signs for them to come in. They turned to each other and smiled. "I'm waiting," he cried. "Do come in. The light is quite perfect and you can bring your drinks." They rose up, sauntered down the walk together. Two green and white butterflies fluttered past them, and in the pear tree at the corner of the garden a thrush began to sing. "You are glad you have met me, Mr. Gray," said Lord Henry, looking at him. "Yes, I'm glad now. I wonder, shall I always be glad?" "Always? That is a dreadful word. It makes me shudder when I hear it. Women are so fond of using it. They spoil every romance by trying to make it last forever." By the way, Lord Henry is very misogynistic. He doesn't like women, and I think that comes across innumerable times. It is what it is. He's a villain. You can hate him. They spoil every romance by trying to make it last forever. It is a meaningless word, too. The only difference between a caprice and a lifelong passion is that a caprice lasts a little longer. As they entered the studio, Dorian Gray put his hand upon Lord Henry's arm. "In that case, let our friendship be a caprice," he murmured, flushing at his own boldness, then stepped up on the platform and resumed his pose. Lord Henry flung himself into a large wicker armchair and watched him. The sweep and dash of the brush on the canvas made the only sound that broke the stillness, except when, now and then, Hallward stepped back to look at his work from a distance. In the slanting beams that streamed through the open doorway, the dust danced and was golden. The heavy scent of the roses seemed to brood over everything. After about a quarter of an hour, Hallward stopped painting, looked for a long time at Dorian Gray, and then for a long time at the picture, biting the end of one of his huge brushes and frowning. "It is quite finished," he cried at last, and stooping down, he wrote his name in long vermilion letters on the left-hand corner of the canvas. Lord Henry came over and examined the picture. It was certainly a wonderful work of art, and a wonderful likeness as well. "My dear fellow, I congratulate you most warmly," he said. "It is the finest portrait of modern times. Mr. Gray, come over and look at yourself." The lad started, as if awakened from some dream. "Is it really finished?" he murmured, stepping down from the platform. "Quite finished," said the painter, "and you have sat splendidly today. I am awfully obliged to you." "That is entirely due to me," broke in Lord Henry. "Isn't it, Mr. Gray?" Dorian made no answer, but passed listlessly in front of his picture and turned toward it. When he saw it, he drew back, and his cheeks flushed for a moment with pleasure. A look of joy came into his eyes, as if he had recognized himself for the first time. He stood there motionless, and in wonder, dimly conscious that Hallward was speaking to him, but not catching the meaning of his words. The sense of his own beauty came upon him like a revelation. I think that's an important word. Revelation is a religious word. For the first time in his life, he realizes he's beautiful. It's like that cliche story where the nerdy girl suddenly dresses up for the first time and realizes she's hot, you know. She was always hot. She just wore glasses. That's how it goes. He had never felt it before. Basil Hallward's compliments had seemed to him to be merely the charming exaggerations of friendship. He had listened to them, laughed at them, forgotten them. They had not influenced his nature. Then came Lord Henry Wotton with his strange panegyric on youth, his terrible warning of its brevity. That had stirred in him at the time, and now, as he stood gazing at the shadow of his own loveliness, the full reality of the description flashed across him. Yes! There would be a day when his face would be wrinkled and wizen, his eyes dim and colorless, the grace of his figure broken and deformed. The scarlet would pass away from his lips and the gold steal from his hair. The life that was to make his soul would mar his body. He would become dreadful, hideous, and uncouth. As he thought of it, a sharp pang of pain struck through him like a knife and made each delicate fiber of his nature quiver. His eyes deepened into amethyst, and across them came a mist of tears. He felt as if a hand of ice had been laid upon his heart. "Don't you like it?" cried Hallward at last, stung a little by the lad's silence, not understanding what it meant. "Of course he likes it," said Lord Henry. "Who wouldn't like it? It's one of the greatest things in modern art. I'll give you anything you ask for it. I must have it." "It is not my property, Harry." "Whose property is it?" "Dorian's, of course," answered the painter. "He is a very lucky fellow." "How sad it is," murmured Dorian Gray with his eyes still fixed upon his own portrait. "How sad it is that I shall grow old and horrible and dreadful. But this picture will remain always young. It will never be older than this particular day of June. If it were only the other way, if it were I who was to be always young, and the picture that was to grow old, for that I would give everything. Yes, there is nothing in the whole world I would not give. I would give my soul for that." Pause. Yeah, we have a Satan figure and a God figure, and here's this humanity figure saying, "I'd sell my soul to be young forever." You know, and could the picture be his soul? What did we just say earlier? The picture is not Basil's property. Basil's God. Whose property is it? Dorian's, of course. It belongs to him. And of course, Lord Henry's like, I'll give you anything for it. I think that's interesting too. I would give my soul for that. You would hardly care for such an arrangement, Basil, cried Lord Henry, laughing. It would be rather hard lines on your work. I should object very strongly, Harry, said Hallward. Dorian Gray turned and looked at him. I believe you would, Basil. You like your art better than your friends. I am no more to you than a green bronze figure, hardly as much, I dare say. The painter stared in amazement. It was so unlike Dorian to speak like that. What had happened? He seemed quite angry. His face was flushed and his cheeks burning. Yes, he continued, I am less to you than your ivory Hermes or your silver fawn. You will like them always. How long will you like me? Till I have my first wrinkle, I suppose. I know now that when one loses one's good looks, whatever they may be, one loses everything. Your picture has taught me that. Lord Henry Wotton is perfectly right. Youth is the only thing worth having. When I find that I am growing old, I shall kill myself. For those of you that have read the book before, I think this is an interesting passage. In fact, this whole thing is pretty interesting. That's all I'm going to say. Hallward turned pale and caught his hand. Dorian, he cried, don't talk like that. I have never had such a friend as you. I shall never have such another. You are not jealous of material things, are you? You who are finer than any of them? I am jealous of everything whose beauty does not die. I am jealous of the portrait you have painted of me. Why should it keep what I must lose? Every moment that passes takes something from me and gives something to it. Oh, if it were only the other way, if the picture could change it, I could be always what I am now. Why did you paint it? It will mock me someday. Mock me horribly. Foreshadowing. The hot tears welled into his eyes. He tore his hand away and flinging himself on the divan, he buried his face in the cushions as though he was praying. This is your doing, Harry, said the painter bitterly. Lord Henry shrugged his shoulders. It is the real Dorian Gray, that is all. It is not. If it is not, what have I to do with it? You should have gone away when I asked you, he muttered. I stayed when you asked me, was Lord Henry's answer. Harry, I can't quarrel with my two best friends at once, but between you both, you have made me hate the finest piece of work I have ever done, and I will destroy it. What is it but canvas and color? I will not let it come across our three lives and mar them. Dorian Gray lifted his golden head from the pillow and with pallid face and tear-stained eyes looked at him as he walked over to the painting table that was set beneath the high curtained window. What was he doing there? His fingers were straying about among the litter of tin tubes and dry brushes, seeking for something. Yes, it was for the long palette knife with its thin blade of lithe steel. He had found it at last. He was going to rip up the canvas. With a stifled sob, the lad leaped from the couch and, rushing over to Hallward, tore the knife out of his hand and flung it to the end of the studio. Don't, Basil, don't, he cried. It would be murder. I am glad you appreciate my work at last, Dorian, said the painter coldly, when he had recovered from his surprise. I never thought you would. Appreciate it? I am in love with it, Basil. It is part of myself. I feel that. Oh, that's interesting. He's in love with the picture. The picture is a picture of himself. Is this a narcissist thing? Well, as soon as you are dry, you shall be varnished and framed and sent home. Then you can do what you like with yourself. And he walked across the room and rang the bell for tea. You will have tea, of course, Dorian, and so will you, Harry. Or do you object to such simple pleasure? I adore simple pleasures, said Lord Henry. They are the last refuge of the complex. But I don't like scenes, except on the stage. What absurd fellows you are, both of you. I wonder who it was that defined man as a rational animal. It was the most premature definition ever given. Man is many things, but he is not rational. I'm glad he is not, after all, though I wish you chaps would not squabble over the picture. You had much better let me have it, Basil. That silly boy doesn't really want it, and I really do. If you let anyone have it but me, Basil, I shall never forgive you, cried Dorian Gray. And I don't allow people to call me a silly boy. You know the picture's yours, Dorian. I gave it to you before it existed. And you know you have been a little silly, Mr. Gray, and that you don't really object to being reminded that you are extremely young. I should have objected very strongly this morning, Lord Henry. Ah, this morning. You have lived since then. There came a knock at the door, and the butler entered with a laden tea tray and set it down upon a small Japanese table. There was a rattle of cups and saucers and the hissing of a fluted Georgian urn. 2 globe-shaped china dishes were brought in by a page. Dorian Gray went over and poured out the tea. The 2 men sauntered languidly to the table and examined what was under the covers. Let us go to the theatre tonight, said Lord Henry. There is sure to be something on, somewhere. I have promised to dine at White's, but it is only with an old friend, so I can send him a wire and say that I am ill, or that I am prevented from coming in consequence of a subsequent engagement. I think that would be rather a nice excuse. It would have all the surprise of candor. It's such a bore.